we're we're gonna go ahead and get on this here in about a minute or so. We got one more minute. For those new to Regenerative Iteration, this is an interview series where we are the anti-sage on stage. I know it's a good pun on my name, but that's what we're trying to get rid of. And because a lot of people just talk the regenerative talk and their regeneration talk, and they don't realize how much work it really takes. So this whole conversation or this whole interview series is to talk about it. What does it really take to build these systems? What are kind of blockers are we feeling? And how are we able to find success in this work? Because it's tough. So today we have Garrett Smith. I'm super excited about having Garrett on to this. We're going to go ahead and about five, maybe six after, we'll go ahead and get started. So everyone get your water, whatever you need, and we'll get started here in just a few minutes, actually.
Talking awesome. Just some really neat people.
Oh, that's great. That's great. All right, we're going to kick off here. All right, ready to go? Let's do this.
All
Hi,
right.
everyone. Welcome to Regeneration. My name is Sage Harper. I'm your host today. We are we have been doing this GRC series now for quite a bit here. And ultimately, this whole interview series is talking about what does it really mean to get these projects going. We have a lot of do-gooders out there that are trying really hard to get these great projects activated, trying to do good work for all of us, whether it's community, whether it's nature, whether it's environment, whether it's history, commons. We got a lot of great people doing great work. This work is hard though. So the whole point of this series is to talk about the hard stuff, talk about the things that we are working really hard to get through, but we've struggled on, to talk about the success that we found and talk about our failures. Only through really understanding what it takes to get these projects going and get good work out there are we able to do this work together. So I'm really happy to bring you a strong interview today, Mr. Garrett Smith. He's a professional engineer with over 30 years working on infrastructure and working on regenerative systems that eat waste and make the planet a better place. So, Garrett, I'm really super excited to have you on here, and go ahead, spotlight you. And
Great.
if you don't mind, could you basically, you got about 10 minutes or so, can you give us an introduction on who you are and sort of catch us up to you and all your good work, please?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Sage, and everyone who's listening. Appreciate it. I think one of the greatest treasures anyone can have when you have something to say and share is to be able to be given that voice. And sometimes in the world that doesn't happen. You get silenced when you have something valuable, and you learn how important and priceless that is to have a chance to talk about things. And so I appreciate that, and hopefully I can relate and inspire and invoke some collaboration. I can tell you that I am very passionate about what I do, and it boils down to basically the concept of stewardship. That I believe that we are called to steward people on the planet and to take care of each other and to steward the resources we have in a way that they're sustainable and renewable and regenerated. And those are buzzwords. And I know there's a lot of greenwashing and all these other different things that go on. But the reality is that talk is cheap sometimes, but also talk isn't cheap. And ideas have consequences. And to summarize who I am and what I do, and we kind of, in our conversations, it came up, is polymathism, that it's okay to be good at more than one thing at once. And when I was a child, it was kind of the sports and school. I excelled in athletics and I took school seriously. And a lot of people are like, that's strange. Why do both? It was like, because I can. And as I move forward in my career, I realized that, and I got into short background. I have a degree in mechanical engineering, a professional engineering license, like Sage said. And I've had to realize and become humbled by that that's a toolkit. It doesn't mean I'm an engineer and that's all I am. It just means I have a toolkit with some science there. And I had a chance to study under the late Dwight Bushnell, who was a renowned world leader in thermodynamics and energy conversion and material optimization, just things that were like, hey, how can we make the world better? And there's a fine line where, if you know something's wrong and you don't fix it and don't do anything, it's called kind of being a jerk. But if you know a better way to do things and you go do something about it, that's what love is, because you show up and try to fix things. And I kind of learned that early on, at least in a philosophy. And as I got out into working, I saw systems in power generation, water treatment, food production, agriculture, and I've been on site in thousands of applications from factories to farms and all around the world of how the world operates. And I see lacking systems due a lot of times just to inefficiency. And the whole issue of biomimicry is that the waste from one process can be the feedstock for another. And we see that all around us, right? The classic one's photosynthesis, carbon dioxide and water with chlorophyll turns and light turns that into carbohydrates and oxygen. And the reverse is the use of that fuel. And so it's a carbon cycle. But with respect to all that, that's really who I am. Is I'm a person. I've always said, how can we optimize? How can we make things better? How can we, in the calculus, it's that maxima and minima, right? Any curve has a point where its slope is zero, and that means it's turning the corner. It's either hit its peak or it's hit its bottom. And so what if we turn the peak, called efficiency, or the bottom, losses, and we minimized them and we maximized efficiency? And that's all I've really done in the world of energy, food, air, and water, which, oh, who needs those, right? And that's where I feel like it's not about me, but I'm in big fields because everybody needs those things. And it doesn't take much of a search across headlines or anything to see that the world's hurting. The world has needs in those areas, especially with population growth. And I think the recent pandemic experience kind of exacerbated that because the world more or less came to a standstill. And yet on infrastructure, it really came to a standstill. And the world still isn't catching up. And at the same time, populations are growing. So we see massive needs worldwide in that. I'm originally from America. Most of our work's been in North America. And just in the last few years, really reached out internationally, and it's like a snowball got pushed off the cliff. The demands are just remarkable. So it's exciting to be kind of aligned with those trends where people need what we're offering. And that's really kind of the message there. And I think that ultimately is the test of any business or any endeavor is, are you serving people with something they need? And that's kind of become the mantra for me, is to stay in line with that and believe that there is enough. There's an old song and there's been different reggae versions and everything. It was by the Police originally. Back, I remember having the album Ghost in the Machine, a song called One World Is Enough. And if you hear those lyrics, it's a great song because it starts with that optimism that there is enough. And if we work together and find a way to optimize it, we can get along. And that's where I'll kind of end this thing for me, because even today I was at a political conference, a UN conference here in Tbilisi, Georgia, and where I am now. And the key to all that is that, do you believe that there's enough resources where we can get along, and maybe even there's peace and plenty, that you can walk into places that are in turmoil, nations that are fighting with each other and having problems over resources, and say, hey, we can bring an answer. And that's the ultimate test there sometimes, because you have to see past the headlines of warfare and different skirmishes. And in the Middle East and Central Asia, where I've spent most of the last 2 years, we're right in the middle of it every day, and it's a thrilling experience to bring answers and see how you can fit them in. So that's maybe in a nutshell, kind of off the cuff. Hope that's reasonable there.
Let me push back just a little bit here. If you were to just say in like one word, what kind of engineering, or not one word, one sentence, what kind of engineering are you doing for these types of groups? What kind of systems are you building? Can you go into a little bit more about the breadth of the work and the type of solutions that you're fielding, please?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer it with one word, like you said, and this
That one sentence. I'm sorry.
I will in one word, because someone gave me this just a couple of years ago. I think a gentleman up in Canada, and he said, "You're a habitat engineer." And most of the time we think of that as like, okay, a dwelling space or somebody's like, no, you're dealing with how to make living on Earth better. My background per se, my official PE license and everything is mechanical engineering. I actually got into that because it's really the most diverse. When you study that discipline, you take some electrical, some civil, you get this breadth of knowledge. And that's why I got into that. I was interested in robotics early, but then kind of dove into power generation, resource usage. And you find out that most power generation, you have even wind that does per se too. Solar's a little different with PV cells, but you have rotating machinery with a generator is where most power comes from. Well, 99% of a power plant is mechanical stuff. And then at the very end, you're generating electricity. So it's a cool mix of that. But I'd say, yeah, habitat engineer, because all we've done, and we'll probably talk about that more a little later, is integrating the mechanical engineering aspects, specifically in power generation, where I came from, and realizing it's not the power generation, it's all the other waste streams from power that can produce food, other materials, clean water, all these other things. So it really is, I'd say, a habitat engineer. Making life on Earth better is a pretty good buzzword.
I love it. So if I had to regurgitate that back into what kind of systems you're building complicated systems that are not only power generation, but produce water and food as well. Is that how I would interpret that?
Yeah, and it's here's what's cool, and I don't know if I'll be able to convey this just through this conversation, but I found through my career, the more you integrate those other uses, like integrating power generation, the waste from it to create clean water and food, what's ironic, and this is the fun part, and I have a blast with it every day, it actually makes the system simpler. Because instead of having a whole bunch of back end emissions control, you've got an aquaponics farm and an algae recovery farm that's creating something useful. And it's actually simpler because you're just using natural science. And you just, as a human being and the people around you, it's fun because you're making stuff instead of trying to put band-aids over the bleeding parts, if that makes sense. It's just integrating it all actually makes it easier. But yeah, that's a fair way to say we're taking the complications of modern day power generation, farming, agriculture, and just integrating in a way where it's like, wow, that's pretty simple.
So if I would understand that right from what you're saying again, one more time, just to interrupt, is the power generation outputs, you're actually using that to feed into the aquaponics and the other materials there to let them scrub that outputs. So then the whole output of your system is a lot more environmentally friendly. Is that correct?
Exactly. And it's not even like I appreciate the word you use because that's where we used to call it scrubbers, emission scrubbers. It really flips the whole script. You create a system that wants those emissions because that's the feedstock for the next material on the back chain that's worth even more. And the part for me personally and professionally, I mean, this is how I look at things now. I'm really fortunate that power generation is still in the hub of it all because anything you do these days, and obviously human beings lived a long time before Michael Faraday and other discoveries in Volta and those guys with electricity and the dynamo, just a few hundred years ago. There was obviously, we're electrical beings. I mean, the concept of electricity was out there in function, but fundamentally it drives everything. I mean, without electricity, you see economies struggling. So electricity is a core part of it. That is my in principle background. So I'm very fortunate I get to use that everywhere. But a lot of times it takes the back seat now. It's kind of like with a dairy, for example. We make more money out of the manure than the milk, but you need the milking cows to have the manure. So you realize it's all got to be there. And it's kind of like that. Power generation's great. We make a lot more money out of what isn't being driven to electricity, but you still need that power plant in the center, and obviously the electricity has a good use. So anyway, a bit long-winded, but it's all it. When you have a holistic system like that, everything's necessary. Nothing's a wasted byproduct, and that's ultimately the holy grail, right? When you can use everything, then you're onto something.
Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to jump into the questions here. Thank you so much for the introduction. So, Garrett, you opened our last conversation, or basically you opened this conversation with talking about polymathism and consilience.
Yeah.
Okay, so when did the engineer in you stop being unwilling just to solve one problem? When did you start getting out of just doing power generation and started looking at habitats as a whole? And how did that come about, and how did you build upon that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in a one was kind of thematic and another was very specific. And the specific one came first. And a short story, it was 1993, 94. And I was actually very busy as a resident engineer building what became an award-winning power plant of the year award in McGraw-Hill magazine, one of the cleanest and at the time the most efficient power plant in the world using natural gas, and it had extremely low emission profile. And during that window of time, working 25 hours a day kind of thing, morning, noon, and night, managing a couple several hundred person construction project. I ended up, for some reason, I saw an ad in an ASME, Associated American Society of Mechanical Engineers magazine, about this award contest for ethics and professionalism. And it was on my mind about, the title of, I won an award for it, second place, got paid for it. It was kind of cool. But the title was Acid Rain and the Emergence of Pollution Control Technologies. And I was already thinking along that way of like, hey, we got to be responsible for this. If you have a stack and you have emissions, which we did, then what are we doing about that? And I kind of dove into that. And then a few years later, when I was looking at more project development stuff, it was the California phrase where it was really big NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. And so the question, people say nobody wants a power plant in their backyard. I said, well, why not? Because it's emissions. Nobody wants to live near the pollution, the dirt, the grime, the noise, whatever. So it's like, well, why don't we make things cleaner and quieter? I said it today here at a UN meeting. What if air and water could be cleaner coming out of power plants, factories, and farms than going in? That would change things. So that was back in the 90s. That was a goal I set out to have. And that's kind of driven that ever since. And we have that now where those things do happen. And it changes the equation. It changes how human beings can live. And that was kind of the driver for it. So it's kind of that technology and society question, the liberal arts class I took of how do you reconcile advancements when it's like the industrial revolution. I'm trying to say this is the eco-industrial revolution now, 100 or so years later. So that's early in my career. It was kind of like, what are we going to do about pollution? And instead of just ignoring it, let's come up with some answers. As a final point, something came up the other day and it said pollution is an engineering error. And I thought, wow, maybe it is. What if we could engineer away pollution? And that's what we're doing, basically.
Mm-hmm. So let's go into that. So let's talk about Lake Cogen, Florida, 1994. This is the project that you're talking about that you won an award for. What did you do that the rest of the industry wasn't doing, and how have you doubled down on that in some of your current solutions?
Yeah, that one was really fascinating. I was just out of school. Again, a little bit of the backstory is I'd been working just about 6 months at I won't give the story how I even got the job. It was kind of, the proverbial thing where industries aren't hiring, but I was like, I'm getting in the power sector. So I hired on with a firm designing and building these. They had offices in Seattle and over in New England. And 6 months in, I'm just running around. I'm a kid in a candy store talking to all the different disciplines and learning stuff and being a part of all these different things going on. And I wanted to know everything about how these plants run, every nut and bolt. And I'd studied all the theory and stuff in school, and it's how I got this position. 6 months in, they're like, hey, we need a guy to be a resident engineer at a plant down in Florida with some new technology going in. I was like, sure. I didn't know the difference. I go down there and I was the number 2 man at 23 years old on, $120 million power plant. And I'd show up and they're like, so what are we going to do? And I was looking, I said, what do you mean? So I'd get the blueprints and the design was done out of the New England office. And basically it was a zero discharge facility. We took all wastewaters, cleaned them up with, different thermal technologies. It was a combined heat and power plant that gave some steam and electricity to a juice plant. And we did have stacks. There was air emission from the gas turbines, but we basically just deployed some subsystems within the basic power plant to not only be the most efficient, but at the time the cleanest plant in the world too. We just with some various control systems that were on that, and then that what's kind of been fun and exciting is that exact design and what we built in Florida in '94 has been duplicated something like 20,000 times now worldwide. It's just become the back end thing. So when I run into those plants anywhere in the world, I know how our next stage of optimizing them came out of, doing that work because we built the first time around. But basically it's kind of this thing on incremental increases of efficiency. And this is where I believe most advancements come from. The news articles want people to think, oh, Bill had a dream and showed up with some great new scientific wonder. I get skeptical when I hear that. Usually it's somebody who's in the trenches building these kind of plants, taking the 20 variables and making 8 of them 5% more efficient all at once, and it has a big impact. And to be able to do that, you've got to be in the trenches working on it, where a lot of times it's a millwright, a pipe fitter, an electrician's like, hey, Garrett, come over here. If we did this a little different, this sure would be easier to build and it'd run better. Just some guy way down in the trenches who, in my mind, is way up because he's the guy who's building it, putting it together. That's where a lot of these ideas come from, and integrating that. And that's where I was, just right in the middle. And it was at that particular plant in Florida, we just did, about 20 different things. We just took the time to get rid and have no wastewater, to purify that on site and use the systems to do it. No discharges like that. And it was, just part of the process. I mean, there's more to that story, but just incrementally making things better every step of the way.
Is that still the same philosophy you carried over today? Have you just sort of bridged upon that and sort of doubled down on different areas? Like, how has this grown over the years?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's fun is it's kind of like, you hear the deals of, wash, rinse, repeat or whatever. Really innovation, once you get in that rhythm, you just are always looking for ways to do that. That's why I was thinking about it today, even when I was headed to this meeting, is with automobiles. Say someone goes and buys a new car today. Hey, I got the latest car. It's got all the whiz bang things. China's with, I think it's Jetour's got like 4 motors, one per wheel. I mean, just, advancements and things. Well, you buy a new car and you're like, hey, this is rolling. We all know 10, 15-year-old cars still run, but that 10 years from now, cars are going to be even better. But you don't say, well, I'm not going to buy a car today because there's going to be a better model next year. No, you need a car now. Well, I look at the same way with power generation. I think some investors have gotten carried away on it is, they're thinking, oh, you've got this latest change and all the variability. It's like, look, if you're going to take that long to analyze it, by the time you come around to invest in the next generation, it's going to be even better. And that's always been true. Every step we take, I tell our team, if we're building things the same way 10 years from now, then I've failed you. Everybody here, what I'm really excited about in the company, I have 24 patents in this. There's a guy up in Minnesota that came up with 2 fresh ideas I'd never thought of. And I said, man, these are your patents. I'll pay for them. Maybe the company will keep some small percentage, but this is all you. And that was the biggest thrill of my recent career outside of a few of my patents. Pretty exciting. But I was like, this is great. It's repeating itself. People are thinking going forward, how can we make the next improvement? So yeah, it just becomes a mindset.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. So let's talk about food. So we're on question number 3, everyone. So food, Mint Power Station in 2008. So walk me through what integration looked like in operation, and was there a moment it crossed from power generation into food system logic?
Yeah, and that's again sometimes these answers can seem polymathic, and I don't mean to make them seem confusing, but it's when a lot of different sciences converge. Because on the food side, part of the segue was dealing with manure from dairy waste. The other side was, what can a traditional power plant using coal, oil, or gas use to support agriculture? And where the real fine line meets in there is that, or the convergence of it all, is waste thermal energy from any power plant, which you see it all over. Even nuclear plants have a cooling tower, coal plants, cooling towers, gas, oil. It's rejected waste heat that's actually at a perfectly suitable grade to create a controlled climate environment for aquaponics, which is fish waste, providing fertilizer to the plants, and the plants oxygenating the environment for healthy fish. And I laugh sometimes because the Inca up in the terraced hills of Peru back in the 1500s had amazing aquaponic systems. And you tell people, how does aquaponics work? That's new and everything. It's like, no, there's really, the sun also rises, but there's also sometimes nothing new under the sun. It's about biomimicry and looking at civilizations that have done that. And that's where I started to see that food and energy are intimately related. And one of the cool things, in fact, I just got done. I was so excited about a project down in, I'll just name the country, Namibia in Southern Africa, where we can now use, and we've got this all over. We've got a thing in Sri Lanka and another one in Maldives for kelp or other energy crops, but we can grow fuel. Right. And people have used wood for power generation, wood fired power plants, but we're in a spot now we can pyrolyze the wood, make graphene out of it, and use the fuel gases that come from it to run power generation and do all these things with way better results, but basically an energy crop. And in this case, there's some like millions of hectares of scrub brush that's a nuisance, and it can actually meet the entire power needs of the entire nation after one hydroelectric plant they have. So it's kind of like, wow, there's this great like mass and energy balance just waiting to be tapped into. And that relates to agriculture too. In other words, where crops are carbohydrates, right? Plants. And then so the waste from livestock can be a fuel source, growing crops can be a fuel source, and the waste heat from a fossil fuel plant can also be a fuel source for cultivating food production. And so maybe that sounds long-winded and circuitous, but in reality, it all boils down. I'll boil it down to this one thing, and don't forget this one: carbon dioxide, who's kind of the villain out in the world today. It's the fundamental driver for food production. We either eat plants or we eat things that eat plants, and all those plants, CO2 is vital for it, and CO2 is a byproduct of any combustion. So it doesn't. When you really sit down with it, connecting those dots is, like I said before, it actually is simpler.
Why do you think we're not doing it at scale? If
Mm,
this is so obvious and so easy, and you look
yeah.
at data centers, for instance, and look at the problem with water and energy there. If we could build a closed loop solution on some of those, which people are saying this is definitely doable, why aren't we doing it?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's always the one that pushes the envelope. In fact, I had to ask that about Namibia, where you got these waste scale. I think, the waste material that could suit the whole nation. I think there's if I and it's a great question. In fact, whoever can really answer that, by the time you answer it, you've solved it and you're doing more. The key is we are doing some. Like I said, these things aren't completely radically new. It's standing on the shoulders of giants. Newton said that. Different guys in the Albert of Chartreuse, or it wasn't Albert, it was whoever it was that said that. I forget. I apologize. In France. But the bottom line is that these things are being done. The question is scale. And here's where it kind of happens. I think if you had to pinpoint like one primary villain, you run into it all the time, and it's the anti-polymathism. Along the way, the utility industry, I can speak for America and really worldwide, says we're building a power plant. We're going to make electricity. And what happens with our carbon dioxide emissions or our thermal energy or anything else, ash from the power, hey, whatever we got to do just to comply. And we're going to, like, what is a compliance air permit? See, this is where you have to understand, and this is maybe why it doesn't happen. Here's the deal: people put regulatory compliance ahead of scientific possibility. And why? Because you're just trying to get a permit and go get a plant built. But a permit and a regulatory license, that's not science, right? When we talk about wastewaters, there's allowable nitrate levels, right, for biological oxygen demand, BOD or COD, for how much oxygen this waste is going to consume. Well, what if, like, for us, our allowable nitrates are zero? Why leave any nitrogen on the table? You can use it for something else. So it changes the mindset. So I got out of the box of what's the minimum to do for compliance and said, how can we use that waste stream? And I think it comes down to that. People who are polymathic are thinking, hey, what can we do with the waste stream? Whereas an industry in the power industry is super bad about it, still is. I get in
Mhm.
conversation at least once a day. Somebody in the power sector is like, no, we're not going to do graphene or food or algae or anything else. We're making electricity and that's it. And so it takes a mind shift, but I found it's liberating when you start to say, what are the possibilities of doing something else? I think, and here's the ultimate answer. I've kind of talked myself into it, and this maybe is at least what my experience. I'd love to hear other people say it. Is that When I see that there's a potential alternative to do something better, I say, okay, clean the table off and get to work. Figure it out and go apply it. And I take that as a challenge. And I like that. It's kind of a labor of love. I find a lot of people like, whoa, no way. My brain's maxed out. I've already decided this is how we do it. I don't want the responsibility of having to learn something new. And and so in a way, why don't people do it? The laziness. They just don't want to change, and then nobody's really forcing them to.
Yeah.
And that's where, for us, ultimately, if you look at the world at large, it doesn't take long to look around and see that somebody somewhere is hurting and has a lack. I'll throw this in and maybe going too long. If you want to study something in the issue of what love is and showing up to help fellow mankind, it's the last book someone would think about it. But you want to read a book about polymathism and giving back and making a difference in the world, read The Lunatic Express by Carl Hoffman. And you'll see that there's billions of people in the world that live in squalor with optimism, and they do things to just eke out an existence. And when you read that book, if you're ethical, you can't stay unchanged. Say, you know what, I got to get off the couch and go figure out a better way to make life better for people. So maybe that's kind of it. Again, no one answer there, but I think it comes down to personal accountability. Is not enough people want change, and so you're just kind of pushing that inertia.
How much do you think the U.S. policy, or I should say, when you look at municipality policy, you usually have silos that happen through energy, through waste treatment, through water, through all parts of that. And ultimately, when you're dealing with municipalities, a lot of these polymathic solutions can't break past the siloed bureaucracy. How do we get past that?
Yeah, that's another tough one because you've got establishments, you've got patterns, rules of thumb, budgets. It's just kind of thing. Like I think here's one way I get past it, and this is a teaching tool all the time. And you can look at various accounting levels. As an engineer, you got to study economics. But I think one of the great misnomers and misconceptions and fundamental flaws in the way human beings can look at things is we put first cost of something way out in front of net operating income or profitability. In other words, you come in and say, hey, I've got a better system that costs 10% more, but it makes like 300% more profits. Most of the world's economists will say, no, it's too expensive because they're so fixated on that initial cost. And then 9 times out of 10 anymore with the green stuff we're doing, there's tax incentives anyway. So it's like, wait a minute, like you're just chasing your tail. I think that's
For
part.
those of you who are not in government contracting or have never been on the government contracting side of things or municipal contracting, a lot of this, the majority of these contracts that get put out there are what they call LPTA, which is lowest price, technically acceptable.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's the world that we can save in budgets and it offset the risk onto the contractor. However, when you're dealing with something that can be best value or something that can improve past that, I'd say in a lot of ways our current contracting system just does not allow that. We don't bake in the opportunity for innovation within the average contract. Is this what you're also seeing as well?
Yeah, and it's that kind of thing where, like, we've always stayed as a private company. We do a lot of public contracts, work with utilities, governments, but we're kind of in that world of the independent power producer, the IPP, which AES is still the world's largest power company, and that's what they are. And we emulated that model. So it's like you keep your privatization so you can go and push. In fact, a lot of our patents were developed doing jobs for public, sometimes private entities. And we went to the owners and said, hey, we see an opportunity to make this improvement. I know you don't have the budget. We're going to pay for it and do it, and you can have the benefits because we just want to prove it commercially. And then we work out a deal where we get some of the shared profits from the benefit or whatever. That's how a lot of those have gone. Where you got the basic plant, that one that
Mhm.
costs X, when it comes about that it's X times 1.1, 10% higher. We foot the bill for that 10% to advance it. And I find ultimately, and this could get me in trouble, and I don't mean to get in trouble. I would say that one of the biggest challenges in innovation, and I'm going to just say this might be a static point in time, the venture capital industry And the angel investment community, they need to get some education because I see money going after just sheer nonsense, and I don't know who they're believing. And it's somebody, I think it's Malcolm Gladwell said, well, the biggest commodity is knowledge, information. How do you know you're getting accurate information? And you can run through AI and it says, well, is it commercially proven and all this? And the venture capital guys want to see that. It's a typical banking thing where they'll say, oh, we'll pay for that after it's up and running and cash flowing. And it's like, so you'll pay for it after we pay for it and build it. Well, by then we don't need, it's this dichotomy going on. And I think that's why some of these innovations are so, and high tech went through it, the Hewlett Packards. I just watched the Jobs film, which, you can have different opinions. I thought it was a great movie. Steve Jobs was a visionary, Wozniak, everything. The guy comes to him and says, nobody wants to use a personal computer. They're going to carry a computer around, whatever, like we do now with mobile phones and everything. But the biggest challenge then is nobody even knows what that is. They don't even know what to buy. It's like a new topic. Well, that's why I think fundamentally I try to stay grounded in what we're doing and still say to this day, energy, food, air, and water. You're already buying it. Here's just a better, more efficient way to make it. It shouldn't
Yeah.
be that big of a leap, but sometimes it still is for people.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me move on here. So, air. So, Richard Feynman. So, what if air and water were cleaner coming out of the power plants, factories, and farms than going in? For the air piece, fuel gas, CO2 becomes photosynthetic algae and then graphene. So, we haven't talked about this yet, and we haven't talked about algae, and we haven't talked about graphene or any of that. So, let's real quick walk us through what this loop actually does step by step and where we are today on the road for this first installation. Now, I want to preface this before Garrett starts talking. Guys, Garrett's developed and launched hundreds of systems out there, 24 patents, 128 implemented processes. So what Garrett's talking about now is sort of his latest innovation of how to really make the loop work for the consumer and for those who own the systems. So that said, Garrett, take us through it. What are you trying to build today?
Great introduction, and I appreciate that on that. And I'll keep it. It's actually a simple answer on the what, and then the implementation is kind of cool, and I have an analogy for it. So what it is simple, and you can follow the chemistry. You got a combustion system, coal, oil, gas, whatever, wood. The CO2 is a perfect feedstock for algae production or moss, any kind of, it's going to drive photosynthesis. Moss and algae are the best because they're stemless and rootless, so they can just grow fast and easy harvest. And all that technology's been developed. We were part of pioneering a lot of it. So then you take the algae biomass, and in our systems now, we pyrolyze it, where we heat it without oxygen with an electric arc system. So there's no external burning of any kind. And it brings it up to a high temperature and breaks it down into fuels and ultimately to graphene, a very valuable product. The fuel that comes off the gas can be synthesized into liquid fuel or used as gas and keeps the process going. That becomes the fuel. And yes, you have to have fuel in. It doesn't defy the first law. It's not perpetual motion, but you're basically creating more fuel from the waste from the fuel combustion and bringing that in. And so it goes full circle. So we can start with exhaust from a plant and create our more fuel from it, or start with a solid fuel and put it into the system. We call it the Dariel 360 because I kind of came up with that name and the concept and sized and scaled it out while I was at the Dariel Pass up at the Georgia-Russia border last year. That's our 24th patent. But in reality, all it did, and this answers kind of the question of what it is. Imagine an automobile manufacturing plant like a Henry Ford factory when he's putting those together, and he's running that, and the Dodge brothers come up with a better engine design. Well, if he goes to put their new engine in the next car, is that a whole new assembly line? No, it's just a better. And what if somebody had better brake pads or better, chassis or a better way to make the frame or a control system or whatever? Are you reinventing the car? No, you're going to existing manufacturing bases, tweaking with the assembly line a little bit, and here comes the next model to make it more efficient. That's all we're doing today. Everything we have and anything we're building like that system, it's all been done. And it's all been done in even more difficult circumstances. In fact, our pyrolysis equipment was based on garbage as fuel, which anybody in that industry, that's the worst fuel. High moisture content, huge variability. It's hard to control it. That's what it was based on. And so fundamentally, that loop is ready to go, commercially ready. And it's kind of this cool moment of sort of the post-pandemic world where infrastructure lagged, the needs are greater than ever as population grows. And I will say this, and this might get into the final commentary, and this is where the opportunity is. The financial world has just, to me, kind of gone asleep at the wheel. It's like, guys, you see it with the data center, and we have data center possibilities. Yeah, totally closed loop, pollution free, high valuation, where our power system making the graphene makes more money than the data center. It's like, guys, it's kind of a no brainer. It's a byproduct of the process. And I don't know where the finance world is. It's crazy to watch this everywhere I go.
Why do you say that? What is the better LOE that you can provide versus what's already out there right now?
Well, first of all, it's deployment. And it gets down to that thing, the static thing. When you look at the hockey stick curve, the bottom line is we need more power and more food production. The human race, this is not debatable. Everyone agrees on it, and except for the specific dates. But basically, we need as much food made in the next 3 decades as the prior 3 millennia. And we need as much electricity, new generation put in the next 10 to 30 years as the prior 300, the history of electric power as we know it. So basically, regardless of efficiency, scale, whatever, the demand is there. And what I mean by that is you can read in the headlines where XYZ data center company just buys a bank of diesel engines or gas-fired reciprocating, no combined heat and power, no emissions capture, no graphene, nothing, just straight away standalone power generation. Elon Musk did it with some gas turbines down at a plant. I think it was in the Carolinas there. Maybe it was in Tennessee. I forget the exact location. Squawk because he didn't get permits for it. I'm like, Elon, come on, man. You're in there throwing basically like a Yugo where you could at least buy a pickup truck and put something in that's decent. And it all just gives a bad name. What you see in power generation, everything's knee jerk reactions. Well, the reality is with our modular system, this Dariel 360, we can build faster and more permanently and everything. So it's a question of, you can have your cake and eat it too. But you've got to at least know what that means, and we're not, the queen saying that, we're on the positive side of the French Revolution here. It's like we're talking about having it all come together. But ultimately, that's the thing that I think the world right now is kind of setting itself up for some serious challenges, because even if you don't use the best energy, food, air, water production, it's like we have literally a 20-kilometer high tsunami coming, and
Garrett, let me pause you for a second. Let me tie back into the question. The question is based on current power plants and your system, where you're now producing the possibility, not possibility, but we're going to use graphene as another output as well, so we can capture more complete and different value streams. So the question is based on your system versus more traditional systems. What's the LCOE, which is a localized cost of energy bump or percentage versus a local system? So how much more profitable could your system be or will?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Actually, yeah, on paper, literally, and this is maybe where it blows people's minds. It's conservatively, it's 300 to 800 times more. And we
So
can
just so I
build
heard that, you're
it.
saying 300 times to 800 times better than the current system.
Yes, and we can build it faster with less permits because there's no pollution. And that's why I'm even in Georgia and down in Oman is building factories, Henry Ford style, to build this modular equipment because we see that coming, and that's what's going to happen. And here's what's wild, Sage. This is what's incredible. I couldn't believe it the other day. Somebody was asking to do a feasibility study, so our guy in Oregon was checking it and everything. Our systems are actually less expensive than the status quo right now, by significant margin. I couldn't believe the numbers myself, but it was we're 25% lower cost.
Is that
than the
because of where
status
you're
quo. Because
manufacturing, or is that based on general prices no matter where you are?
it's what's cool is it's the modularity, and this gets into the nitty gritty of it all. Is our systems all, and I won't get into all the details, but it's all out there. It's on the internet. We got stuff posted. It's modular. It's this concept of what's the best way to, if say it's like Lego blocks. We were kind of playing with that analogy. If you want to build a bigger scale something, just get some more Lego pieces. See, the traditional utility scale, water and food, especially agriculture too, says, oh, we need X size farm. We're going to go build this giant farm and it's not going to produce anything till it's all built. Well, we now have things that are like literally like Lego pieces going in. And it's cheaper to build 1,000 Lego pieces than 1,000 Lego piece size structure. What it gets into is decentralization, distributed generation is the word. I was quoted a lot earlier this century in that magazine, had articles, interviews. It's talking about making things smaller, more efficient, so you can be in someone's backyard and cleaner, and at the same time you get modular and scale. And so it's where the polymathism and consiliency snowballs, because now it's even better. It's even less expensive, more modular, cleaner. And that's where we're at. And it's kind of like, and again, I get back to the thing. If you're involved in finance, we are on the cusp right now of and I won't mince words on this one. This is bigger than the semiconductor movement. And analysts will say, because graphene, electricity, food, these are things here to stay. Semiconductor stuff like Steve Jobs is amazing with those, Robert Noyce and the Intel. I mean, look what we did with sand. Nobody even knew that before transistors, whatever. I'm talking everyday stuff everybody makes, population growing. We have ways to make it 30 to 300% cheaper and 300 to 800 times more profit margin. Wow, it's not rocket science at that level.
Okay, so let's talk about modularity. Um, True or false, if you can confirm me, most energy systems within the US today are built bespoke. True?
What was the last word? Are built what?
Bespoke.
I'm
Um,
sorry. Say
okay, so let me rephrase this then.
I,
So, true or false, most systems within the US are built ad hoc, one off. I'm
oh
saying bespoke, meaning like they were built for that particular thing that they're trying to do, correct?
yeah, I got you. And it's ad hoc, and it's also most of the time like you'll see as far as modularity and power plants.
Yeah.
One big unit, maybe two, maybe three. Beyond that, it's kind of no. It's just
Let me get to
one
my
big.
point then. So,
Yeah,
so,
yeah,
so with modularity and with a rinse and repeat type system, meaning now I'm building this phone over and over again. I'm not building something custom. Will that open the barrier for banking investment on these type of systems versus private investors? Because that is a big problem right now because these systems are built custom every time. So usually they have private big bag investors.
yeah.
Am I right
And
on this?
yeah, absolutely. And that's what happens is you've got the people in that space, usually utilities and utilities banks. Two or three of them will go in together and say, okay, we're going to build another one big plant like this, and it won't make any money for the 5 years it's being built, and then it goes forward. And yeah, it's a real niche market, a few banks in there. And as those banks have peeled off, Lehman Brothers and others, things fall apart, Enron's problems. Yeah, the playing field's really small and they don't want to do it anymore because the margins aren't very good. They've got air emissions, all these different things going on. And yeah, that's a big factor. And I think the part we're trying to show as Concentric is that in this kind of post COVID, everybody got decimated financially. With modularity, what comes with it is you can put one Lego piece in for the minimum price and start cash flows that can pay for the next. So, in other words, what we're trying to forewarn people in money about is that this thing cash rolls itself. Each Lego piece is capable of making some profit. So, whoever gets to this first and we're in pole position, you become your own bank. And that's pretty awesome. And again, that's simple economics. It doesn't take rocket science. But yeah, the equation is going to change. You're going to, in the energy, food, air, and water industries, I predict right now that yeah, there's some institutional, government, AIIB, World Bank, whatever, but you're going to see some private banking groups pop up that aren't even on the radar screen now, and they're going to be multi-trillion-dollar banking groups inside of the next decade. That's just inevitable.
Did I hear you right in saying that you can deploy a portion of the system and then use the returns on that to bootstrap the rest of the system, or are you still going to have to get the whole thing funded?
Exactly. That's what's so beautiful. It's kind of like if you buy one truck and you're running a delivery company and you make profits, and the next month you got enough money to buy the next truck, and so on. And that's the way it can go. That's growing organically. We'd like to get a little bit of a wise financial group to say, hey, let's do a few more at a time. And we have partners around the world. We're just kind of grinding through all of it. Yeah, that's basically what we can do now with, and it's omnivorous too, what's been put together. Coal, oil, gas, manures, wood, sewage, scrap tires. Yes, the final fine tuning makes a difference, but basically we can run all that with basically the same equipment now. Nobody, it's we broke through. That's my kind of coup d'etat on a technical mechanical engineering front is we hit that we got to the top of the Everest of that. Now I'm still looking around saying what's next. You're going to fly off the top or whatever, but we hit a pinnacle this past year on designs with proven systems, and we got video. It's run, it's commercial, it's a big deal. I remember putting that together, and I went to my wife and some of the guys on the team and said, "This is going to be the semiconductor discovery. This is Intel level, integrated circuit type invention."
Thank you, thank you. All right, Garrett, we're about out of time, guys. I'm sorry I didn't get through many of the questions today.
That's my fault too.
I'm sorry.
That's my fault too. I'm sorry.
No, no, no. It's fine. It's fine. I didn't do a good job of organizing these. I should have baked in some of these extra questions. Garrett, what's one question that I should have asked that I just maybe didn't get to or that you were hoping for? Is there any other questions on there?
Yeah, that's a great question itself, and it's kind of challenging for me sometimes because when you're in the woods, when you're in at the front line of the battle, and a guy comes in and says, "Hey, what do you need?" It's like I just need to find a way to survive another day, and we're kind of in the grind, and we got something exciting. I would think the question to ask is like, and it's a question I ask too. It's we all ask is what language, what vocabulary needs to be developed to tell people that there is a better way, that more technologies advance than just microelectronics, that there are other macro science things with thermodynamics and botany and optics and everything coming together. And the question is, what is that vocabulary? And that's I work on it every day, trying to how do we describe this that it's simpler and better at the same time, and that's a thing I'm always seeking. It's a lot of our literature that comes out, stuff on the website and posts I have on social media. It'll be a one-page flyer of some new thing, and we're just trying to capture that buzzword, and that's the elusive thing. And I don't have the answer for it. I know it makes sense to me, so then it's like, how do you explain it? But maybe that's it.
I love it. Love it. Garrett, what's one way we can follow you? And guys, just so you know, in the speaker sheet that I've been linking here in chat, it has a link to Garrett's website, has a link to his LinkedIn, his Concentric DAO as well, and I think there's maybe one or two other in there. So Garrett, what's the best way for us to keep up with you? Like you got a lot of stuff going on. How can we track what you're
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
and there's opportunities to collaborate? How was the best
yeah.
way?
Yeah, thank you. Everything really is in Concentric. ConcentricIndustries.net is our native website that's kind of serving North America. We've got multiple other domains and other websites active that have custom translations into those languages. But Concentric DAO, we are a decentralized autonomous organization registered in Wyoming and Panama. We're also a public benefit corporation in Delaware. We've kind of stayed nimble to respond to different banking needs. But fundamentally, yeah, Concentric is the way to track things. And then I've got, the LinkedIn and a link tree and a bunch of other social media. But Yeah, Concentric is where everything's all in Concentric. We've got the what we do and why we do it. Concentric is three branches: energy, the Nautilus Energy Alliance, Kalos Food Holdings, and then Kairos Health, Medicine, and Justice. Because we've cooshed into our business plan, this DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, to also provide the social services and build up communities where we go, because we said you got to have a reason why you're doing it. We put that right on Front Street with our business model. So if you're interested at all in quality of life for people, including yourself and your community, um, follow Concentric, because we're in the business of making the world better, and it's an all game sum situation. We get into political and economic writings, but yeah, everything's through Concentric.
Are there any other struggles that you may be facing that a member of GRC may be able to support you with?
Well, yeah, I mean, fundamentally, because of what we do, we could go out and be a business and get these plants built and get funding and just build power plants and move on. But we're trying to be a brand. We're trying to be the global representative of this all gain some concept, where like we're dealing a lot in Africa and South America, where there's been millennia or at least centuries of exploitation. We're trying to come in and say, no, we want to partner with you and do these things. So fundamentally, the number one way to be a part and support what we're doing is just be aware that there is a better way and that we bring it. And if you don't believe that or see it, study it. There's information on our websites. We're happy to answer questions. We've got in our rebirth, we peaked out around 7,000 employees earlier this century. We've got about 100 people involved right now on a day-to-day basis worldwide, and we're kind of running on just a shoestring to kind of bring. It's a great story. I got to restart up a company I started up 40 years ago. But what we need is consensus. That people realize there is a better alternative. And then if you're involved in finance at any level, or people that are like, it's all, we're at a spot now, and here I'll summarize it this way. We've got the technology, the business plans, the philosophies, the corporate structure, all the details and everything. We just need the connections, because it's a people business. We can't just walk into countries and start building some. We've got to meet people and know them. So if you know government officials, finance people, whatever, you don't have to be an energy expert or anything. We're not looking, you don't have to be a billionaire. There's going to be people at our sites that are janitors and secretaries and, technicians and all that. That's going to be the bread and butter of it. And so, if you're interested in how the world can be better, just be aware of what we have. And so if it comes up in a conversation anywhere, just say, yeah, we heard about this group. You might check them out. And we're just kind of building that brand so that people can know there's a better way.
Thank you so much, Garrett. All right, everyone. We hope you enjoyed today's interview. We're going to wrap up the interview today. Next week, I do not have anyone to interview. So if you have a regenerative project, or you're just like, man, I'd love to get interviewed and learn more about it, to have others learn more about what we're doing and share this with the world. All of our interviews get published on YouTube. Last week, we had Dave Winslow, our very own, and we had our State of the Union for how GRC was going. It was great. We already published that one as well. So, Dave, if you don't mind, while I'm closing this out, could you put a link to the YouTube channel in chat, if you don't mind, so everyone can see that as well, if you don't mind? Thanks. So next week, I don't have an interview. Don't worry, though, if we don't have anyone, I'm just going to do an open planning, and we'll talk about who we want to see next, and we'll start to throw some invites out there. I have no problem inviting people. I can call people cold. I don't mind at all. So we'll see who we want to get in the room. If we don't have anyone, if you're here and you're like, yes, I want to get interviewed, I will put my email in chat. And other than that, Garrett, thank you so much for coming on today. We know it's late, your time. I appreciate you scheduling some extra time for us. And ladies and gentlemen, we're open now. This is the open Q&A session. You can come off of mute. You can talk to Garrett. Garrett has agreed to stay on for the next about 30 minutes or so. So the floor is all of yours. Please come off and mute. Comments, questions, anything you like, please. The floor is all of yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Sage.
It's my pleasure, sir. There's my email in chat, y'all, if you want to get interviewed. And please, any questions for Garrett? Garrett, there's a couple in chat that I didn't ask. We were just running a little bit out of time, and I didn't get a chance to weed some of those in. Nico actually had a question in there talking about examples of completely renewable energy systems that you've helped design. Have you been in that lane at all?
Yeah, no, on renewable, are you talking like wind and solar, things that take non-solid or gas fuel to
I'm
non-combustion
not
systems?
sure. Nico, you want to come off of mute and ask that question directly?
Yeah, like you mentioned the biomass system in Namibia, that sounds very intriguing. But anything that's non-fossil fuel, I would say, or non-big hydro, I would lump in there too.
Yeah, yeah, no, great question, and I caveat some of that too is we don't have any challenges. I know nuclear science is great. In fact, Jose Reyes, who developed NuScale, his first year as a professor at Oregon State was my last year. I didn't know those were his aspirations. We've done work in nuclear plants, but we don't have any IP in that. We do have some intellectual property in wind and solar. I view wind and solar, and I think every roof should be solar panels. We've got a really cool external bladeless. It's a Bernoulli effect wind turbine. We're looking at getting into some manufacturing of that. I think all of those have great applications in almost every residential and commercial installation anywhere in the world. You know, when people talk clouds and this, now you still get some PV out of that. And especially, you look at China, how much they've done on PV panels, everything, costs have been driven down. So we're a huge advocate for those things. I'm not as big a fan, and I'll say why on the topic of large scale wind and solar. And the reason why is your efficiencies and your availability issues. But one of the biggest things, it's not even so much grid shaping because you still need peaking turbines and other things available when those drop down. But it also is this thing that's coming about, and I heard a great term for it. It was called inverter based resources. When you have wind and solar who aren't generating at frequency, they're generating at whatever they need DC, then drive into a variable speed generator to get 50 or 60 hertz, depending on where you are in the world. There's no inertia behind that, like there is with hydro or a large scale generator somewhere, the physical flywheel effect. And so we're seeing the grid kind of suffer a lot for large scale resources. We've done some large scale, like we've been a part of solar thermal and some large wind turbine projects. But fundamentally, I think those are better as distributed resources along rooftops. The wind we have systems that are, and there's other brands out there, but the typical turbines that we started our segue into that on were the vertical shaft type that might only be 10 to 20 feet tall and could go on columns on buildings. We've now advanced into our, literally there's no moving part externally. And again, it's in a shape that can fit in less than 10-foot diameter. So it fits well on like a commercial building landscape. But we love that stuff. And then also, there's some great advancements in some tidal power and wave type power. We're all for those things. We try to get around some of that. One of the challenges, and this is where the power industry has some positions that make sense, and I appreciate the question, is that scale does matter, economy of scale does matter. And when you have, you know, in the gigawatt scale needs of a grid, a 5 or 10 kilowatt level system is much more useful and beneficial at that residential commercial scale. And so it's always finding ways to integrate that. But yeah, we love those technologies. There's definitely a place for them, and we hope to drive some of that forward. We've kind of held off on a lot of our wind and solar until we can amass the capital back and start to do some manufacturing ourselves of that. And that's part of the plan. Great question, though. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
Anyone else?
One thing I'll say on that while we're waiting for another question is on the solar side, we really love solar thermal too. So you have PV panels with the hot water collection underneath it, and that actually makes the PV panels run more efficiently as you cool them down, and you're getting the heat out of it too. We feel like every rooftop really anywhere in the world should have that, whether it's commercial or residential, and we're part of groups trying to advocate for that.
Yeah, that you've got me wondering about sort of a question about like the grid and where power generation is done. would it make sense? It sounds like it. This is what the economy has driven so far, and it sounds like going forward, this is what you would expect to continue. There's a larger generation system located somewhere, and it fuels a whole region rather than smaller systems that would fuel a neighborhood or something like that. It just makes more sense economically to have that larger system.
You're talking, yeah, and this gets into the whole paradigm shift that we're a part of, and I'll explain that because I've been addressing that issue really from the beginning of my career, is that central power station mentality. And I can say that, yes, economy of scale is real. I remember sitting up, we were doing a lot of work with PG&E, the big utility in California, and we shared office space with them actually in Transamerican Tower. And I remember this argument I got in with an accountant, a young guy up there, and it was like he's got his pro forma and it's embedded in it as economy of scale assumptions. So it's like we've got to do, an 800 megawatt plant remotely because nobody wants that big power plant in their neighborhood. And I said to him, I said, Steve, what if you had it modular, it was smaller, and it didn't have emissions? Then half of your assumptions are not relevant anymore. And that was the ongoing debate. And he's like, well, that's not possible. I said, yeah, it is. We were already advancing on some things. And so it comes into that question of if you could do plants that were cleaner and more efficient and cleaned up water at the same time, you could put them at the corner of a neighborhood. You could put them near the load center. The Pacific Northwest is a great example because you have hydropower east of the mountains, but most of the load's west. Well, that created risk or the vulnerability in grid outages because your loads are elsewhere. So we were always looking at that in combined heat and power. And again, now that here's what's fun and exciting and why I'm so bullish on this Dariel 360 we put together. We call it a renewable electric arc pyrolysis, a modular plant single unit that basically can fit in like half a dozen shipping containers, get assembled in the field quickly, like in a matter of days, literally, and essentially if you want a bigger plant, you just have more of them. And the question was always this: I don't know if you're familiar, there's a Finnish company, an engine manufacturer called Wärtsilä that was big in reciprocating engines for marine propulsion and power generation. They did a big fancy study years ago, and they said the magic number is 5 to 6, where you'd have 5 to 6 of a certain module, and then you'd get these, without getting too much operations and maintenance problem, you'd get some reliability. So if one unit's down for maintenance, you still have 5 of the 6 running and what have you. Well, we've kind of turned that and amplified it, said, what if you had a coal plant? And this is where data centers come in. Instead of one big generator that's offline, like a lot of coal plants, what if you had 100 of these module units and lost one? You still have 99% availability. Some foreign nations that are looking at big data center projects are glued into that, thinking that's the way we need to go. And again, we're less expensive at the same time. And one of the big things that comes into play on that for us, it's a great question on this whole model, is we value human labor. And look at a lot of business models across America, especially, where labor becomes this thing that they're constantly trying to grind down. Well, on a global level, there's a lot of people that work for just stupid low wages, in comparison. So it's like, what if we built these plants and even we had people doing fuel collection or cleaning up the yard and just could give jobs to people that were effectively like $1 a day, which is a fortune to them and their environment, and create these community funds and did these projects that just needed a little more maintenance. And they really don't. I mean, everything's automated now and it's plug and play and all that. So we've kind of combated that issue to the point where, and this is where I think we're going to bridge the gap, because we're going to the utility sector and say, we can play big too. We came from big, large scale central power station. We can still do that, but we can also scale down to one unit and you can have the best of both worlds. But it's a great topic you bring up. And I responded a bit long on it because that's another, like when Sage asked me, what's the disconnect? That's part of it, because people still think you can't have smaller power. But again, our modular unit, if it all goes to electricity, we're still making like 5 megawatts from it. So it's not like a, micro turbine or something. It's still pretty scalable. And but all those the numbers do matter. I think that's part of the problem that happens in general society is people say, oh, these guys, I saw a thing the other day, they were making, and it's awesome, they're making sustainable aviation fuel out of the methane gas from an anaerobic digester at a dairy farm. And cool, you can certainly process that. And we've been a part of making some gas to the pipeline from it and everything. But if you look at on an energy basis, agricultural wastes are never really going to touch like fossil fuel nuclear scale. It's just not going to be there. It's still meaningful, but you're not going to solve the sustainable aviation fuel challenge with agricultural waste. You can chip away at it, and it's a good business model, but sometimes I think people think, like when people will say, oh, there's a lot of garbage or a lot of scrap tires or something. Well, it's a finite amount and you can quantify it and size it up. And when you get right down to it, coal itself still is still the beast of the world energy systems, and it by a big margin. And that's why we developed our stuff to have zero emission coal, and we have that. And again, it ties back into this system of, I think the best way we can go after that central power station, I call it a misconception, just people take the assumption, but is show them that you can do both. Yeah, and I see that called zero emissions coal. Yeah, because again, we seaweed biomass for SAF. Zero emissions coal, because again, what we do, it's simple. We pyrolyze the coal. Okay, so it makes on the solid side turns into graphene. The gas side turns into synthetic gas. Essentially it's methane and CO and others. It's a high hydrogen fuel that can either go directly to a high hydrogen combustion system of turbines or engines, depending on scale and what we're doing, or Fischer-Tropsch system is what's built into this refinery there. And there's other ways to break it down to a liquid fuel. So we basically are making electricity and or liquid fuel, and then all of the emissions from that combustion are captured back in the algae recovery, which goes into more biomass feedstock. So it's a closed loop. And that's how. So it's totally emission free, and that's gonna change the coal industry. We've got contracts with foreign nations that are doing gigawatt scale coal fired data centers, and they're looking at what we offer with the multiple units and zero emissions, and they're just like, what other option is there? So yeah, it's pretty cool. I was responding to the thing on the screen there, but yeah, the whole central power station versus distributed generation. That is one of the greatest challenges I think facing the whole world and everything. I mean, if you look at computers, that was the big deal there too. People are like, I don't want a Cray computer on my hip, and now we carry phones with us. It has to do with the mindset, and then people realizing that technologies can keep getting better. And I think in power generation, there's just been a lack there of people trying to, like, I think where it comes down to the advantage Concentric brings, and me personally, was I started big. I started with large scale central power and worked down. So I knew the variables. I knew what their pro formas looked like. I knew what the assumptions were. And I find very few people in the space I'm in now that came from power. A lot of them are coming from other places, and there's a lot of good people. And part of our business plan is that we need all hands on deck. There's going to be, I expect to have 100,000 employees before the end of next decade or more. And a lot of that is just the thousands that go into any individual plant. So it just kind of scales. But appreciate the question. It certainly gets my mind, but that's a major topic, is decentralized versus centralized anything.
Part of the reason why I asked that question is I'm a civil engineer, and I would love to see our development practices change. And one of the questions that I wonder about sometimes is what would it look like if a neighborhood or a community had their own power system, the grid was underground, who would maintain and run that power system? Would that just be a fee that they pay as part of the community? Would it include, like what you're saying, the distributed systems of solar and wind? Is it battery? Is it some kind of generation? I'm in California in the foothills of the Sierra, so you know, fire is a big issue with the power lines, and then also people in this area have been trying to figure out, well, how do we do, you know, energy generation using biomass from the forest, and it's an incredibly difficult thing to make profitable, and it's mostly due to the transportation costs. And so, you know, people have thrown out these ideas of these mobile units, but it's just a difficult problem to solve. And I don't, honestly, I don't know that it's the right problem to solve. You know, really, I think the real answer is, which is kind of out of the scope of this conversation, but cultural fire practices, biochar generation on site. You know, where you're not trucking the biochar somewhere. You're just using it where it's made to regenerate the place where you made it, and so that's kind of a different conversation. But it definitely, all that stuff is still sort of swimming around, and people keep asking these questions every year. So yeah.
Yeah, and I really in one way, it's certainly, yeah, let's follow up. I mean, get in touch with me, because a lot of our early days were the California like PERPA QF projects with wood, you know, most of the time from a sawmill or something else, but then the wood basket. And we've done all kinds of reconnaissance and projects and different everything from like Oroville down to, you know, down in the Fresno, you know, the San Joaquin Valley and everything. That's where a lot of our pedigree started. And one thing is, yes, owning and operating the plants to provide that as a turnkey solution, and we built that in. I can tell you this is where we're excited about the answer is, one, the traditional combustion systems don't scale. And that's been one of the problems. If you're having to drive hundreds of miles and you're bringing wood back to a combustion plant, we did a rice hull plant in Williams there years ago, and there were incentives or whatever, but the combustion plants are lagging because you got lack of efficiency, you got emissions you're dealing with without benefit. And then if all you're doing is that singular electric power sales price, it's just a volatile thing. And again, the utilities they're not going to go invest all kinds of money in 5 and 10 megawatt systems. But now and I'm excited for this. And you're jogging my mind, because I remember being down in San Bernardino talking to a fire marshal. This is like 25, 30 years ago, and said, hey, instead of just waiting for the annual fires, you guys could be doing some thinning, providing people full-time jobs and have a biomass facility. And it's like, no, but they've got it set up politically where they just want the fire money, you know. So it's not even, it's just almost like a scandalous thing when you say, wait a minute, this is just bad stewardship. But for us now, we're looking energy crop stuff, you know, like kelp and seaweed, but also, you know, some other grasses and other things that could be used. But with us, this modular, like a 5 megawatt system, is a rule of thumb, and getting into details, 72 tons a day of dry feedstock is not that much. It's more than nothing, but it's manageable. And that's where this scaled down unit comes in, and it'll be individually profitable if we went all electricity, like a 4 to 5 megawatt plant, depending on the feedstock. So it's kind of getting into that decentralized model, and you gain a lot of benefits if you had 20 of those spread up and down a valley. And again, it's pollution free. We're capturing everything. I tell some people the proof in the pudding is that system still takes, you know, we'd like to have at least a hectare, you know, 2.5 acres, but really about an acre size for it. So it's not like a off the shelf, you know, you're just going to go down to the store and buy one. It's kind of that hybrid. But yeah, California, we'd love to do some more work there. We've had great success all along and different things, if that's where you're based, and up into Nevada. Yeah, so stay in touch. And this modular plant single unit changes the equation a lot.
David, sir.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Garrett. Really interesting stuff. And I was like, there was two threads that I was going to yank on, but one is just I was listening to, you know, a Dietrich Klein podcast yesterday about the abundance phenomenon and all the books that have been written about abundance. It does feel like, you know, the centralization is one of the constraints, right? There's a genuine tension between having to run big power lines and having to have you know, the subunits and, you know, all the kinds of stuff that's kind of what makes this makes so much of this stuff politically problematic, I guess. And so it feels like you're on a really good path to try to, you know, if you could break this down, you kind of simplify the problem of the decision making a lot. So it's really cool. Well, One of the things I was
Yeah.
wondering about, and maybe you kind of answered this because it sounds like you're able to bootstrap yourself a little bit, but I've wondered some about a lot of regenerative projects, if you will, kind of imagine or actually are starting in a totally pristine environment. It's a greenfield strategy. Like we're gonna create a village that's off by itself in the woods, and don't have to respond to anybody. It's totally independent. And yet, real change is going to happen when we engage with what's going on in the world. So you have to kind of get into the brownfields.
Yeah.
And there's a valley of death kind of. How do you get from getting it started up to growing it enough so that you can then survive, in the rest of the world? How do you think about that?
Yeah, and what you're saying there is absolutely the thing where you get into that technology and society and the geopolitical issues and everything and the social ramifications. And those are the things where I think, and great question, by the way, thank you. And I appreciate the interest. Please stay in touch because these are all the relevant things that as you go through and you try to change a paradigm, I think Buckminster Fuller said, he goes, if you're trying to change a paradigm, you can't really do it incrementally. Just come up with something that just radically changes stuff. There's truth in that, and I totally believe it. We have the little placard even on our website, but at the same time, the more you're different from the status quo, the harder it's going to be to say, hey, let's try this. And that's where, my hats off to like the computer industry, because I was like inventing some people didn't even know what it was, And so in this scenario, though, to get to the question you're asking, because it really is relevant, is to create it starts with an issue like politically and, geosocially, whatever, is to realize that the grid and the electric utility industry, and I came from there and we've locked horns and everything, fundamentally isn't evil. It's not like they're bad. And utilities have great people there. But when you have a regulated monopoly, it was a Oregon Department of Energy, their president, who was a big advocate for our original company back in the 90s. He came to me one time after a conference. He said, you just have to realize that the utilities, they don't have a responsibility to innovate or get better. If nothing happens, they just apply for rate changes and people can complain, but there's not really a stopgap there. And that's part of the nature of a regulated monopoly. But with all that is I think in the quest for a cleaner and more efficient and more profitable system, we've got stuff now that could support 5 megawatts for totally off-grid living, or 2 and make liquid fuels, with the balance. It's a very flexible system. And I'm for that, but I also see the grid has value all over, supporting industry. But we've got a lot of projects that are behind the meter, industrial parks. We're ultimately at our backbone. I see it come back, and we had to explain. We're a cogeneration company. I mean, our origins were combined heat and power, having a gas or wood or oil-fired coal system, but gas, ag waste, and providing heat and power that, the Scandinavia has proven that a lot. So we just come in from proven systems and weigh out, what is the scale and what can keep it real. And I can just say this, that the polymathism part, why it's so important, because if you can add multiple revenue streams without adding a new fuel and without adding, like I said before, sometimes our systems can seem 25-30% more expensive, but have, 3 times the profits. Anymore, they're kind of about the same price because environmental cleanup equipment's getting more and more expensive. So basically, for about the same price, we make 6 or 7 revenue streams. I think that's the big difference. And again, what are the revenue streams? They're usable products. If you have this in a decentralized, community living scenario, you can use clean water and food production. These are everyday products. The graphene industry is obviously a giant multi-trillion-dollar one. And I think it was you or the other gentleman brought up, is that a lot of things happen in this prima donna laboratory case where they're doing the micro level this and that. And graphene's gone through that phase too. A lot of that is being done at the university level, and that's great. We just cracked the code to how to make a good base level of graphene out of anything with carbon in it. And the sky's the limit for optimizing the applications and where it goes. So if you're in a village community and you're making graphene, that might not give a multi-billion dollar, revenue stream if you're not selling it, but it itself is a great soil amendment. It's just elevated biochar. So you could use that as a soil amendment, water filtration, whatever. So all of the things we're making are very usable on an everyday basis. I think that matters. It stays really practical. And I think that's and I'm digressing here a little bit, but I think one of the challenges we've had in our refinancing and the regrowth is that people look at our company and they think we're just a developer, like looking for money. And it's like, no, we are the owner operator. We're the group that's built these in the trenches. And we think that's the real value. But what you're talking about, I think, is applications. And that's where we try to be universal and we can keep scaling down, but it's, yeah, sorry to be so long-winded on that. That's another one of those questions that you have to be mindful of your approach to, like, what is really a problem and what is something that just needs to be modified. And the grid is one of those things that it has its value for sure.
Well, again, let me just stick it. I'll just point out that this link to the Liquid Star, which I talked to Connor last month or two, and maybe of interest to you. Just kind of it feels like a similar model, but with a more of a focus on processing.
Yeah, we're always down for that. In fact, I would say that because we're still a company, and it comes across my desk of new technologies all the time. And frankly, like on the graphene side, like I said, well, just to explain this, and this is where it comes about, and everybody can join in and be a part of this, is we make the first stage of our pyrolysis makes an ecochar. It's the second stage that goes higher temperature for shorter time frame because we can control it electrically to make the graphene. Well, we get approached by some of those ivory tower university level things that said, well, our graphene production does this a little different. Well, we can take our EcoChar and put it into that system too. I love to see new technologies and how we can integrate. And this is my ultimate message on the technology frontier. With population growing like it is, we need a lot more collaboration instead of like, well, this guy does it this way, that way. It's like, let's embrace them both. Let's keep advancing this. And because maybe the byproduct of one guy's process is the feedstock for something even better. And again, we've just interchanged the pieces of the puzzle. But again, I love to see that, and there needs to be more collaboration. And it is hard because we're all kind of somewhere in there. If you're involved in anything with electricity or fuels, you're dealing with the electric utility industry or the big oil industry. Frankly, though, I found those guys aren't really the big roadblocks. I think the biggest challenge to all this stuff is just habits of people. I'll say this in America, and this is part of where education matters, is people almost want that polar fight. They want to be either jobs or environment. It's like, what if you could have both? And I've had some people come to me and say, well, then you took away our thunder. That's that's what we're writing books about. These are the bad guys. And it's like, no, it doesn't. Everybody can win here. But yeah, appreciate you, David. Thanks for your comments and stuff. Let's stay in touch. Are you in America? Right on.
Well, California.
Okay, cool. Yeah. How are things going there? I haven't been back in a while. We had a big office in a small town of Arbuckle, north of Sacramento, for a long time. We did a project there and just kind of built out a lot of stuff. And then down in San Clemente, down in LA area, was kind of Irvine Ranch Water District was a big client, and we did a lot of work down in the LA basin. Those were the good old days.
What did you do in Arbuckle?
We built, actually, it was a fun project. And the reason we centered there's a company, they're still in business, neat family, Adams, the Adams family, really. Adams Oil, Adams Grain. They've got a few divisions. They're I think they're still the largest independent grain trader. What they do is their main business, they pick up the extra cargo carriers from like Cargill and Archer Daniels Midland, what other public traded companies. I think Cargill was private or whatever, but Adams was this niche market group. Well, they also had the largest organic vegetable oil refinery right there in Arbuckle, which sounds big, but it's not a big refinery. I mean, it was large scale, but compared to like an oil petroleum, small. They make all the oil for kettle chips and those kind of things. So we built a trigeneration plant for them, a natural gas fired electricity, heat, and then had some absorption chilling. Really neat project. And that was back when California had those huge price spikes and then incentives for on-site power. But from that location, we kind of shared some office for a while and did a lot of work around the Sacramento area and all that. But yeah, they're still in business. Wayne, the third generation president, is still running things.
All right, everyone. Any last questions for Garrett? Garrett, you've been more than generous with your time. We appreciate you
thanks so much, Garrett.
Yeah, you bet. Nice to meet everybody. Sage, thanks so much. Had a blast, and look forward to staying in touch with everyone. Thanks so much.
Of course, of course. All right, everyone, we're going to wrap this up. Again, if you want to get interviewed next week, my email is in chat. Garrett, thank you so much for showing up today. We appreciate you, sir, and look forward to seeing you guys around GRC then. See you guys next week. Take care so much.
Thanks, Sage. Bye, guys.
All right, bye-bye.